Hello and welcome to another episode of The Facts. I'm your host, Brianna Sagdahl. This week we're joined by former Speaker of the House and current attorney, Steve Haugard. Steve, thank you so much for joining us and welcome to The Facts.
Thanks very much. I'm glad to be here.
This week we have a continued conversation about land rights in South Dakota. Specifically, this week we're talking about the proposed prison in Lincoln County and the frustration that residents have with the way that the state has handled this. Can you kind of walk us through the way that this is unfolding and some of the talking points of the state, why the prison is being proposed, and how it sort of unfolded up until this point?
Well, Brianna, I think the essence of the way this developed is there was an idea that a prison needed to be built, that the current facilities were not adequate. There was a study done as a statewide facility plan study that was done a couple of years ago, and the presumption was that there needs to be a new building. And I don't agree with that. Many of the Lincoln County residents, their response is, we don't like the location. It's going to have a negative impact on property values in that area, housing development, all those kinds of things. And there's just more questions than there are answers. And unfortunately, when you're going to bring forward a huge project like this, hundreds of millions of dollars that's going to be there permanently, when you're going to do something like that, you should have an open, honest, thorough discussion with the public before you get that far.
And typically there's a comment period, right?
Well, there's comment periods. There's been comment periods about corrections generally. There hasn't been much in the way of comment period about where's the location going to be. And so that appears to have been decided more behind the scenes than out in the open. And for any project of state government, it should be a transparent event. There should be a full, fair discussion. You should lay out what are your goals, what are your needs, what's the approach going to be, and what do you expect to be the ultimate result.
One of the quotes from this study said something to the effect of, absent significant criminal justice reform, this prison facility would be needed in addition or in order to facilitate the growing population. Is that accurate?
They did this statewide facility plan, and it's 101 pages, and early on in the presentation, the executive summary, the second paragraph, it says that, absent significant criminal justice reforms. So it says, presuming that you're not going to do anything different, if you're just going to continue to incarcerate and not really have a long-term plan for how you're going to reduce your recidivism rate or reduce your prison population, assuming that, then you're going to need this expanded facility.
And Steve, if I may, you've spent a significant amount of time in South Dakota State Legislature, correct?
Yeah, I served 8 years and Speaker of the House for a couple of years and on appropriations for a couple of years. And so I've seen the budget develop, and I see how money is shifted around. For example, this past year, without a thorough plan as to what was going to be done with $200 million, they allocated that for what they called workforce real estate infrastructure. Had nothing to do with workforce real estate infrastructure other than increasing profits for developers. So, those kinds of things are frustrating, but they happen quickly. This likewise seems to be happening far too quickly without a plan as to what we're going to ultimately achieve.
Thank you for that. In addition, when was the last time that South Dakota's legislature has heard any criminal justice reform bills?
Well, throughout the years, they hear a variety of things, but as far as a comprehensive plan, a discussion about how is this going to impact our recidivism rate, what are we doing right, what are we doing wrong, that hasn't happened for decades. And so you go back to an era, probably about the time I started law practice 40 years ago, where life was quite different. The values that people shared were quite different at that point, where there was a significant concern about being incarcerated. You might never get a job again, or it's going to have a dramatic impact on things. Well, that's changed a lot. And so you have individuals that don't have that fear or that concern as much as they used to. So if that's true, then how do you treat individuals differently when you're going to actually deprive them of their liberty? Are you going to actually make an impact and change what they they do when they get out, or are you just going to incarcerate them, hold them tight for a few years, and then they're out again? Because nearly 95% of all of our inmates will be on the street again, standing next to us in the line at the checkout in the next few years.
Certainly. And wouldn't we rather make sure that when they graduate, they have, or excuse me, when they're released, they have potentially graduated with a degree, or they are capable of integrating back into society as opposed to becoming institutionalized?
Exactly, and a lot of what we have too is you got drug use, you've got alcohol abuse, you've got some people that are truly violent criminals, and that can change too, but say you've got a small segment of people that are extremely violent, you address that likewise.
Hold that thought right there, and we will be right back after these messages. Thank you so much for tuning in. Again, I'm Brianna Sagdahl, and these are the facts. When we left off for break, we were discussing recidivism rates, and you were about to tell us kind of the difference between 40 years ago and today, and what compels people and what motivates them to stay out of prison, for example. Can you touch on that a little bit?
Yep, I sure can. And those rates probably have been somewhat consistent over these past years, but there was a whole different culture, a whole different set of values that people shared 40, 50 years ago that they no longer do. At this point, you have recidivism rates that are way too high, anywhere from 50% to 70+%. Other models of correction, such as what's used in Norway, they have a recidivism rate that's somewhere in the 20% range. The difference is the approach to the prisoner when they come in. And we should recognize the same thing. Nearly all these people will be going back out the door in the next few years. So if that's true, then what would you want to see when they go back out the door? I think you want to see that they've completed their GED or some education, that they've completed some rehabilitation in regard to drug and alcohol issues, and that they've got some vocational skills that they can market when they get out. And we do that to a certain extent, but not nearly as much as we should. And so that's what's going to reduce your recidivism rates. And so we should be looking at models of treatment and incarceration that are making a difference. For example, a few years ago, I spoke at a conference down in Louisiana, a corrections conference. And the thing that they're doing different there, they're having a significant change in their culture within their prison because they brought faith-based approaches into that. And it's made a world of difference. I spoke to the lieutenant governor in Texas, and he likewise was telling me that they've adopted that same approach there, where they've instituted this educational model, take some of those graduates out of that group, send them out to the various prisons that they have in Texas, and they have over 100 different prisons in Texas. And they're seeing a difference in the culture within the prisons. So it's reducing the violence within the prisons, it's reducing the recidivism rate to a certain extent. It's going to be hard to quantify that, especially like in Texas where they've got other factors involved. But we could be doing the same thing here, and we have some of that, but not enough to make a world of difference. So we need to look at what's going to be best long-term result for these inmates, as opposed to just planning that we're going to continue to fill cells. And I don't mean to just be negative and not say there's solutions to these problems, but there are solutions out there, or at least there's better outcomes out there if you just take a look at what happens elsewhere, apply some logic to this, consider the people that are coming in, how many have mental health needs, how many have addictions, and all those types of things.
I was just going to ask, what is the system doing to differentiate between mental health issues and actual criminal behavior, such as violent crime, and how is each individual assessed?
Well, they are assessed, and they're rated in certain ways to figure out what do they need, how much safety an issue with this person. What's their medication like? Do they need medications? So they're doing some of that. But we're paying such low wages that we don't have enough staff to adequately secure the place, and we don't pay enough staff to be good mentors, good facilitators for mental health treatment and better outcomes. We need to invest money in staff as opposed to buildings. The facilities we have right now, you've got the Jameson unit there that can house about 1,000 people if you maxed it out. You've got the main walls that are housing a lot of folks there, and you could transition out of that, meaning you could find better places for them. Not everybody needs to be behind 10 or 12 inches of concrete. They oftentimes need some sort of structure and supervision, like, for example, the facilities we have right now. We've got the Jameson unit. You've got plenty of acres right around that. You could expand that unit. In fact, we added an $8 million addition on that just a couple of years ago, or last year maybe it was. We expanded out in the front of that, redid the parking lot. We spent millions of dollars on those things. But you could add on to the Jameson unit because it's only 30 years old, and you could replicate that in that same footprint. And you look at the other places we've got the West Farm. We still own that. That's just west of Sioux Falls a little ways. That was a great facility for its purpose for a long period of time, where they actually had the inmates working on the farm, producing a result.
I was just going to ask. I mean, it seems the most logical idea to create job opportunities and growth and help to create some type of skill set while individuals are serving their time. And then that way at least they can re-enter society with a set of skills, maybe a trade.
Well, they do that to a certain extent, but again, you don't have enough staff to accomplish all those things. There's some great things going on at Pheasant Land Industries up on the hill, where they do Braille books and unique things that these folks, if and when they get out of there, they could take that skill and make a fortune probably. But you've also got welding and other trades that go on there, but not as much as we should be doing as far as vocational skills training. But you've got the present facility, you've got the West Farm. You look at other facilities or other locations like Plankinton, you could use that. That's been a juvenile facility, and I think they're still using it right now as a juvenile facility, but you could use that for rehab, for example. You could have a lot of inmates there going through a program of rehabilitation for drug and alcohol addictions. You've got the Redfield facility. For those that have significant mental health needs, you potentially could modify some of the use at Redfield, because that campus was originally designed to hold, at one point, as many in 1961, I think they had 1,198 individuals there. Now they're down to 65. And so when you've got that massive campus there, and they've destroyed some of the buildings, but there's things that you could do to shift some of the treatment, rehabilitation into different areas.
And we're going to discuss that right after this break. Thank you so much for joining us. Stick around, we'll be right back. Welcome back to The Facts. Again, this week we're discussing the prison project in Lincoln County with attorney and former Speaker of the House, Steve Haugard. And as we wrap up, Steve, let's discuss solutions. How do we solve this issue, and where do we start?
Well, I think you start with an analysis of what's your current prison population, what are they in for, and some of that was referenced in the report, but it really didn't dive into how do you resolve those issues, how do you actually do corrections. In corrections, the idea is to correct behavior to a certain extent.
To rehabilitate, right?
To rehabilitate, to restrain, to to provide restitution in situations where there can be restitution, and if you're going to do that, you probably have to run them through a vocational program so they actually get a job when they get out and can effectively provide restitution. So there's a lot of things to look at first, but we have an increasing mental health issue along with it, and a lot of that just derives from the fact that there's a massive amount of drugs and alcohol involved, and so you're going to have inherently some organic mental health issues.
Well, and I can imagine that the fentanyl and opioid epidemic that's raging across the country is absolutely touching South Dakota. I mean, we're not completely isolated. And I would imagine that we could use more facilities like the Link, for example, here in Lincoln County that provides opioid antagonist therapies, for example.
Well, you need those things. There needs to be a much larger plan here. I know the Lincoln County issue is significant, that needs to be addressed, but the larger issue is who are the people that we're dealing with, and how do we best treat them, best restrain them, and best train them to get back out into the workforce at some point in time. Plus, you know, we have 9 reservations in South Dakota that likewise contribute to the population in the penitentiary. So then what are their needs? And are we working effectively with the tribes as far as jurisdictional sharing and sharing resources to try to make for a better result? You've got a facility at Redfield that could address some of the mental health issues. You've got the facility at HSC that has some beds shut off because we're not paying the staff enough. And those things, this is unique. It's going to inherently be expensive for the state, but you've got to figure out how do you hire enough guards that are going to be good guards that are going to stay there and want to be part of this solution. How do you hire enough staff at HSC or Redfield or Plankinton or anyplace else that are going to be good staff that want to stay there and want to devote their lives to helping these people get in a better place in life? So those are solutions that you need to figure out. The Lincoln County issue, again, was just all of a sudden launched and everyone's told this is where it's going to be, but we haven't been told that this is going to be an effective solution to a problem that we have. And so you've got to figure that out, and it's just not fair to the residents all across the state to say we're going to move this prison down there, because for a lot of people, if they're going to come from the west, it's going to add another half hour of travel time. The prison bus is going to have another half hour of travel time to get across Sioux Falls and down into Lincoln County. And the prison bus comes from Rapid City, I think, twice a week. So you've got practical things that need to be addressed there. And you could have regional facilities. You've already got Jameson. You've already got facilities scattered throughout the state that could be used for specialized parts of this. And you could build smaller facilities, for example, West River, and give opportunity for people that are actually living West River to see their family. So there are good options out there. They just haven't been adequately explored, and I think it's in large part because there is presumption that because this building up here is 140 years old, it's got to go. Well, that part's 140 years old. The part behind it is 30 years old. And it's still set up in a location where everybody knows that's a prison, and if you just expand the Jameson unit, if you had to do that, so be it. But you need to have a plan in place before you go that far.
And the goal should certainly not be to continue to fill up prisons.
Exactly. You know, when there's solutions to problems, you should figure out what those potential solutions are, instead of just presuming that because our population is going to grow, we're going to have a higher rate of incarceration. When I started practice, there were about 500 people in the pen, and the population increased by maybe 20 to 25%. Now we have about 5 times as many people in the pen, maybe as much as 7 times as many people in the pen. That doesn't make any sense, and you ought to figure out why did that happen and how do we change this trajectory.
So would, say, for example, a summer study be appropriate in this situation?
It depends on who you have on the summer study. If you go into a summer study, for example, this work group that came together and talked about it, there were people that threw out suggestions about an alternative, and those were kind of put down quickly because there was presumption that we're going to take this 140-year-old building and get rid of it, and we're going to build a new prison. So that was the presumption going in. And once you have that kind of momentum, all the other ideas and potential solutions were kind of off the table.
If you were in Governor Noem's position, for example, whom would you bring to the table to put on, say, a summer study, for example?
I'd bring in, just many of the people they had on this group, both prison staff, prosecutors, defenders, mental health professionals too, specifically, and figure out who are you dealing with and how do you deal with them. So you need a group that's willing to speak out, take some time, have this out in the public enough so that people get engaged before all of a sudden they're reacting to a location.
Steve, it's been a pleasure. You always have excellent solutions. I'm grateful for your time.
Well,
thank you so much.
Thank you.
And thank you so much for tuning in to another episode of The Facts.